in Europe to the Navy just means more planes, more ships for the achievement of victory over Japan. Ships like the new carrier Franklin D. Roosevelt. Mrs. Roosevelt, with Mrs. Towers, wife of Vice Admiral Towers and sponsor of the carrier, arrives for the christening, followed by Fleet Admiral King and General Marshall. As the FDR is launched, eyes turn to the Pacific and to the words of Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King.
We never did and never shall underestimate the staying powers of the Japanese. They are tough, resourceful, and as devoted to their cause as we are to ours.
Admiral King's words proved prophetic. In just under 3 months, up to 300,000 lives were lost in the final major battle of the Pacific theater of World War II. The Battle of Okinawa was the capstone for the opposing forces in the Pacific, the pinnacle of the evolving character of the war as the Americans demonstrated their might in combined arms amphibious assaults, while the Japanese once again proved themselves masters of the stubborn defense behind fixed fortifications. In the ensuing battle, the opponents pushed themselves to the extremes of human endurance in order to claim control over the small island just 400 miles south of Kyushu, the Japanese homeland. The severity of the fighting on air, land, and sea cut deep into the soul of the American war effort, and the mounting casualties caused many to wonder if this was only a prequel to the severity of the fighting expected on mainland Japan. The heavy resistance on Okinawa, however, proved to be the undoing of the Japanese, as the Americans sought less conventional ways to bring the Empire of Japan to its knees. 80 years later, the Battle of Okinawa remains embedded in the identity of the Marine Corps and is a continual reminder that Marines always finish the job, no matter the cost. The Japanese 32nd Army was organized on Okinawa early in April 1944 and turned over to Lieutenant General Withdrew Ushijima in August of that year. He brought in a new Chief of Staff, Major General Isamu Cho, an engineer. Both men had recently been closeted with the head of the Imperial Japanese General Staff and were fresh from the earliest arguments at headquarters about the manner of island defense. In those discussions, there had been general agreement that the log-type pillbox afforded insufficient protection against naval gunfire and airstrikes, and that it must be abandoned for a system based on caves and concrete. The agreement as to where the new type of structure should be placed was less general. The Imperial staff contained a number of conservative old officers who were diehards for the idea of defending at the beach line, making counterattacks early and in great force. Ushijima and Cho belonged to the other camp, like Kurebayashi of Iwo Jima, but the contest between the two viewpoints resulted, as such arguments often did among Japanese officers, in a set of orders that embraced the ideas of both factions. That is, Ushijima and Cho were to hold the beaches and make counterattacks, but also conduct a passive defense in the interior. The defense of the Ryukyu Islands was assigned to the 32nd Army's 4 divisions and 2 independent brigades, the 9th, 24th, 62nd, and 28th Divisions, and the 44th and 45th Independent Mixed Brigades. Ultra-communication intercepts of Japanese military traffic estimated between 55,000 and 65,000 32nd Army troops on Okinawa, but there were actually around 110,000. The forces assigned to the 32nd Army were not so large as to fill its commander with any great confidence in the value of this double defense. The area under his charge included the whole of Okinawa Gunto. The main island is about 67 miles long, very irregular in shape, from 3 to 10 miles wide, and has a native population of origins so curiously mixed that anthropologists have long since given up trying to separate its elements and are content simply to call the people Okinawans. There were some 450,000 of them, mostly engaged in subsistence farming, with a few vegetables for export, and nearly all living in the southwestern third of the island, all the rest of which rises sharply from the sea into wooded hills and ravines so steep as to resist cultivation. General Ushijima promptly conscripted all the able-bodied males to work on his fortifications, while the women carried baskets of earth for their men or were established in comfort houses for the troops.
Within 2 weeks of the capture of Iwo Jima, the forces of the Navy were on their way further westward, west to Okinawa, 370 miles south of Japan. It was the greatest invasion armada ever to operate in the Pacific.
The overall invasion task force commander was Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner. Under Turner's command was the landing force made up of the 10th U.S. Army, a naval gunfire support task force, and an escort carrier group. Lieutenant General Simon Buckner led the landing force. Under Buckner's command were the 24th U.S. Army Corps, the 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps, the 10th Army Tactical Air Force. The 24th Corps was commanded by Major General John Hodges and consisted of the 7th, 27th, 77th, and 96th Infantry Divisions. 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps was commanded by Marine Major General Roy S. Geiger and included the 1st, 2nd, and 6th Marine Divisions. The Tactical Air Force, commanded by Marine Major General Francis P. Mulcahy, consisted of a variety of Marine Corps, Navy, and Army squadrons. The Tactical Air Force would eventually fly over 10,000 combat sorties in support of the 10th Army. The invasion force was the largest assembled in history and included 1,457 ships and 180,004 invasion troops and support personnel. All 6 of the Army and Marine Corps divisions that participated in the landing had extensive combat experience in the Pacific. Ushijima decided to attempt a new island defense strategy. The enemy would be allowed to land relatively unopposed and then would be isolated when the U.S. fleet was decimated with overwhelming air and naval attacks. Once the enemy force was overextended and isolated, it would be attrited by counterattack. Ushijima had no illusion about completely repelling the invaders. His plan was to inflict as much damage as possible against the American force to contribute to the greater defense of Japan, and his defense-in-depth strategy placed heavy emphasis on mortars and artillery, taking advantage of a series of ridges and draws. Crew-served weapons were emplaced on both forward and reverse slopes. U.S. forces would be allowed to seize ground, and then 32nd Army pre-registered artillery fire would be activated. The 32nd Army command post was an engineering marvel, consisting of a sophisticated network of tunnels directly under Shuri Castle. It included 2-story living quarters, running water, and forced air ventilation. It took a year to construct. The Japanese planned a massive air campaign, including extensive use of kamikaze and suicide boat attacks. Tengo, or Heavenly Operation, was the kamikaze portion of the plan, controlled by the Imperial Navy. The Imperial Navy viewed Tengo as an opportunity to score a great victory. The kamikaze attacks originated from Imperial Naval Headquarters in Tokyo when Admiral Toyoda released word of the long-awaited return of the Divine Wind to Japan. Despite the threat posed by the Divine Wind, the mission of the landing force was to seize and defend Okinawa by accomplishing 4 objectives. Seize Kadena and Yontan airfields. cut the island in half, swing north and occupy the northern part of the island, swing south and capture Shuri Castle and the city of Naha. The Hagushi beaches on the west coast were chosen mainly because of the presence of casuarina trees, which only grew on firm and sandy beaches, which are required for landing operations. The terrain adjacent to the Hagushi beaches also lacked natural defensive areas, and it was adjacent to two of the main landing force objectives, Kadena and Yontan airfields. Buckner designated his assault force for the initial waves, the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions on the left flank, and the 7th and 96th Divisions of the U.S. Army on the right flank. The 2nd Marine Division would conduct a feint on the east coast to hold beach defenses in place. The 27th and 77th Divisions would be in ready reserve and follow in trace once the beachhead was established. From the landing beaches, the Marine Divisions would turn north to secure the entire 40-mile portion of the island north of the landing beaches, while the Army units would move south. The Navy would provide fire support and shipborne logistics support during the landing phases. The carrier task forces would remain well out to sea. A line of picket ships would be set up in a ring between the carriers and assault support ships and would alert forces both inside and outside the ring of impending Japanese air attacks.
Then it was time for the big guns to move in and explode the defenses of Okinawa. The guns of hundreds of ships opened up at almost point-blank range, plastering the beaches and the roads and airfields inland with tons of explosives. Big guns, little guns, all guns went to work. The lessons learned from Tarawa to Iwo Jima were applied 100-fold at Okinawa.
On landing day -8, the bombardment support force spread out across the 10-mile frontage of the Hagushi beaches and began 7 days of sustained shelling. On 26 March, elements of the 77th Division were able to seize Karamaretto Island and destroy the suicide boats stationed there. At 0406 on L Day, 1 April 1945, fire against the Hagushi beaches intensified even further. A force consisting of 10 battleships, 9 heavy cruisers, 3 light cruisers, and 23 destroyers bombarded the beach non-stop. The 32nd Army, with the majority of its forces out of range of naval gunfire, suffered little damage. At 0700, naval gunfire was lifted, and the beach assault began.
Then, in familiar pattern, the assault forces went ashore. The pictures looked like those at Tinian, at Guam, at Iwo Jima. We've seen them before. But every time for these men, there's blood ahead and death.
Despite predictions of heavy casualties during the landing, the beaches were captured with hardly a shot being fired. Yontan Airfield was captured on the first day despite intelligence reports that predicted it would take 3 to 7 days. Within 24 hours, 50,000 troops were ashore and had pushed across to the east coast, severing the island in two. The rapid capture of the airfields concerned the Japanese Imperial Headquarters to such an extent that on 3 April, the Western Area Army on Formosa, or Taiwan, issued orders to the 32nd Army to take more offensive actions. Facing only light resistance, the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions headed north, and the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions headed south.
3/4 of a mile inland, a headquarters group was getting ready to move still further forward. A major said to his sergeant, "See that pillbox on the right flank, facing aft? Secure it." That pillbox should have cost 30 lives. 6 men walked over to it and set up their .30 caliber machine gun. There were no Japanese. As the Marines advanced, they dotted their progress with gun positions for security, but it was as easy as that. This charming land, instead of coral fortifications, the beautiful, cool breeze instead of sweltering tropical heat, and mainly the absence of Japanese, lent the place enchantment. This correspondent walked forward about a mile with Captain Don P. Wickoff of Detroit, Michigan, and a patrol of about 20 men. Uphill, down dale, and the country pretty as a park. Captain Wickoff is a fighting Marine line officer cited for his work in other operations. He is a lean, alert man of 25. He kept scanning the countryside and making notes on his map. "This is a shame," Captain Wyckoff grinned. "A waste of good terrain. This is like Indiana and Ohio. It's the prettiest fighting country I've seen this side of Gettysburg. There should be a hell of a battle going on here. This is so disappointing, I enjoy it," First Lieutenant Samuel Kaufman of Boise, Idaho, agreed.
After reaching the east coast of Ishikawa, the Marine Force moved north to secure Motobu Peninsula, where 2 brigades of Japanese were dug into the side of a 12,000-foot-high Mount Yaitake. By 20 April, despite heavy casualties, the Marines had reached the crest of Mount Yaitake and killed all but a handful of the Japanese force. To maintain this rapid advance, some Marines resorted to unconventional methods.
Through the red, soupy swamps and the rice paddies came the Marines, not on foot or in tanks, but like Cossacks booting their horses into the fray. Instead of swords, they brandished flamethrowers and charges of TNT. They rode through the northern reaches of the island in what historians may speak of as the Charge of Okinawa. Mounted on native steeds commandeered from the countryside, the horsemen formed a highly mobile unit that, in 7 days, pushed remnants of retreating Japs 9 miles farther northward. They did it by flushing out caves and pillboxes with flame and dynamite. The horses may work quicker and more terrifying to the pedestrian enemy. Nothing was too fantastic for ancient Okinawa, where the women do all the work and the dead have the best housing. It was a weird place to fight in, and the Japs made it tough, tougher than Peleliu, and nearly as nasty as Iwo Jima. The ridiculous ease of the assault landing fooled no savvy Marine. Waiting for the first thunderbolt of stiff resistance to strike, the Marines marched north in comparatively easy going.
While the Marines were securing the northern portion of the island, Operation South encountered tremendous Japanese resistance. Army frontal assaults against the 32nd Army's complex network of tunnels, pillboxes, and bunkers were causing heavy U.S. losses. Japanese defenders had to be systematically rooted out with tanks and infantry using flamethrowers and explosives. The 32nd Army frontage was spread along Kakazu Ridge, which was a 300-foot slope that stretched for 1,000 yards. Japanese defenses were a honeycomb of pillboxes, tunnels, and caves. 24th Corps elements conducted 4 frontal assaults in 4 days, but gained virtually no territory. Japanese Imperial Command intelligence warned the 32nd Army staff that Marine corsairs would soon be arriving at Kadena and Yantan airfields. Reports also indicated that a 100-ship convoy was offshore of the Urasae Mura escarpment, poised for an amphibious assault. Viewing the beach envelopment as the more severe threat, 32nd Army Chief of Operations Colonel Yahara recommended holding the 24th Division in the rear to defend the southeastern beaches. Chief of Staff Major General Cho urged Ushijima to conduct a bold counterattack to secure the airfields. Cho's plan was to have battalions from both the 62nd and 24th Division, under cover of darkness, infiltrate the 10th Army's rear and sever its supply lines. Simultaneously, frontline units would launch a frontal assault. Yahara objected, arguing a plan that complex over unfamiliar territory would fail and be a waste of manpower. Ushijima was faced with deciding whether to use his limited resources to force a risky offensive against the airfields and leave his rear and flank exposed, or to hold in place. Ushijima sided with his chief of staff. The attack failed miserably. The Japanese commander leading the infiltration had no understanding of American troop disposition and was navigating unfamiliar territory at night. More than half of the infiltration force was killed.
Meanwhile, at sea, there developed a vicious battle between carrier defenders and Japanese land-based bombers, fighters, and suicide squadrons of the Kamikaze Corps. But the squadrons defending our carriers and the marksmanship of Navy anti-aircraft gunners proved too much for the Jap attack. Only 10% of the Jap planes got away. Tracers show the gunner's lead on his target. Then another Jap plane bursts into flames and hurtles into the China Sea. In 2 days, 471 Jap planes went spinning down.
Called the most intense and famous of military history by Winston Churchill, the battle between our determined Pacific Fleet and the internal machines of the Divine Wind is one of the epics of the war. At first, the American sailor regarded suicide planes with a combination of awe and fear, but he stuck to his guns. Many ships' guns were still firing even after a Kamikaze had crashed and exploded. As the suicide campaign increased in tempo, fear turned to hatred. The Pacific War changed in 1945. It became a back-alley struggle, a street fight in which no quarter was asked or given. Death stalked our ships and turned beardless recruits into vengeful killers overnight. The gunners aboard the Yorktown, the famed fighting lady of the carrier fleet, were a good example. In the height of the Okinawa battle, their AA fire hit a Jap Zero in the midst of its dive, causing it to fall off into a flat spin and spiral slowly down towards the formation of ships below. Suddenly, the celebrating soldiers saw a patch of white against the side of their crippled plane. "Hell!" a shout arose. "The bastard's bailing out!" The sight of their hated enemy floating down to safety was too much for even the well-trained and battle-proven men of the Yorktown. Without orders, they instinctively opened fire. The seriousness of the Kamikaze threat was kept a close military secret. When things were touch and go at Okinawa, Admiral Spruance radioed to Nimitz. The skill and effectiveness of enemy suicide attacks and the rate of loss and damage to ships are such that all available means shall be employed to prevent further attacks. Not all of the Kamikazes exploded when they crashed. Some piled up in trash heaps. Some caromed off or slithered over the side in a jumble of wreckage. Occasionally, there would be a grisly fantasy which left a plane jutting from a ship's funnel or sitting on top of the deckhouse like a monstrous bird. Several crashes were climaxed with a headless pilot catapulting from his plane in ceremonial hardy-coddy robes.
It had seemed easy at first. Now it got tougher. And the bodies and the wounded were not all Japs. Here were our men who came from Iowa and Missouri and Maine and Alabama, men whose only thought was to do a job and get it done, whether it took 8 hours or 80, whether there was overtime or not, whether there was beer or K-ration at the end of the day. For it was a job that had to be done, and they were there to do it.
Back on land, with 24th Corps facing stiff resistance in the south, 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps' Roy Geiger proposed a second front be opened by conducting an amphibious landing in the Japanese forces' rear using 3rd Amphibious Corps' floating reserve, the 2nd Marine Division. Buckner rejected the proposal, arguing Minatoga Beach was too vulnerable to Japanese direct fire. Admiral Nimitz sided with Buckner and released the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions from fleet control and made Geiger's force available for general use by the 10th Army. The two divisions would assault the western half of the Naha-Shuri-Yonabaru line, relieving the 27th Division, which would move north for occupation duty. Enemy maps and documents captured in the first 2 weeks of battle provided Buckner with almost complete information on the Japanese defensive dispositions. Buckner believed 24th Corps could turn the eastern flank and could eventually link up with 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps' elements at Naha and encircle the 32nd Army. The U.S. attack took place on the evening of 19 April. The 96th Division encountered intense machine gun fire and achieved no gains. The 7th Division was able to penetrate 500 yards, only to receive extensive pre-registered artillery and mortar fire, and was also driven back.
Dear folks, well, I'm finally writing at last. This sure was a rugged affair over here. Anyway, Who got through without being hit can consider themselves extremely lucky. The old-timers in the company say the fighting on this island compares to the worst they'd ever been in. Some of the 2nd Division said Saipan was a breeze compared to this. The last I wrote to you, I told you I had a machine gun platoon. Well, after being on the lines about 10 minutes, one of the rifle platoon leaders got hit, and I took over. Sid Garland distinguished himself in the assault while leading his platoon. According to official reports of the action, he repeatedly exposed himself to the hostile fire to lead his men forward. Observing that the leader of an adjacent platoon was wounded, he immediately took charge, skillfully organizing and directing the men to advantageous positions from which they could fire upon the Japanese. Shortly afterward, while pinned down by a heavy enemy artillery and mortar barrage, he supervised the withdrawal of both units and constantly braved the hostile fire to assist in the evacuation of numerous casualties. Because of his actions on the ridge, 2nd Lieutenant Garland was later awarded the Silver Star for valor in combat.
Despite the lack of U.S. success, the attack imposed a heavy toll on the Japanese. The Japanese 62nd Division was badly under strength and on the verge of collapsing. Ushijima decided he could no longer afford to defend the south tip of the island against the threat of an amphibious landing. He withdrew the 24th Division from its beach defenses and committed the entire division to the defense of the Shuri Line. Despite this action, by 30 April, the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions and the 1st Marine Division had pushed through Kakazu Ridge and were engaging the 32nd Army at Kochi Ridge.
Death of a tank is one of the most enduring images of the battle for Okinawa and a singularly harrowing moment in Marine Corps film history. The violent, dramatic moments took the lives of Private First Class Earl R. Anderson, Corporal Donald L. Mason, and Corporal Benny B. Woodall, and wounded Corporal Paul V. Durham and Private Billy K. Bledsoe. Square 2 had fallen victim to an improvised mine, later determined to be a pair of 500-pound bombs that had somehow eluded the sweepers. Cameraman Spangler arrived as the first rescuers converged on Square 2. Our attempt to get them out was a race between the fire and suffocation, said Sergeant Gordon. All the fire extinguishers and all the tanks were brought up, but the fire could not be extinguished. We tried to dig out under the driver's hatch, which was buried fairly deep. Marines tried to pound and pry off the escape hatch, spurred by the sound of frantic fists beating on the other side of the armor plate. Paul Durham climbed onto the blazing tank, ignoring the heat and danger to get his crew out. It sounded to Gordon like 2 men were still alive. Suddenly the hatch gave way. Joyner thought the rescuers pried it off. Gordon thought the desperate men inside wrenched it open, and for a split second it looked like they had won. Then the sudden influx of oxygen created a downdraft, fanning the flames and turning the tank into a crematorium. Flames shot out, making it impossible to get in, reported Gordon. Durham, terribly burned on the chest and face, finally jumped from the tank and stumbled away. Reggie Joyner spotted a bloodied Billy Bledsoe staggering past his tank and jumped out to help his buddy to an aid station. As we got away from the tank, I looked back and the ammunition went off, he said. It ripped the whole bottom out of the tank. The 4 gas tanks exploded and a full load of 75mm and .30 caliber ammunition banged and popped irregularly. Square platoon survivors looked on with numb resignation. The once proud Marine tank was left to blow itself to bits as would-be rescuers looked on helplessly, Spangler wrote. One Marine cried.
Lieutenant General Cho continued to advocate an offensive strategy. He proposed committing the 24th Division for a frontal assault, aided by the 44th Mixed Independent Brigade. Cho argued that once an opening was created, the 44th Brigade could exploit the breach, turn left, wheel south, and isolate and destroy the 1st Marine Division. Simultaneously, the 26th Shipping Engineering Regiment would conduct shore-to-shore landings on both flanks, resulting in the collapse of 24th Corps. Colonel Yahara again countered Cho's approach by arguing that the Japanese force would eventually be destroyed regardless of which plan was adopted, and therefore the 32nd Army should maintain a strict holding action to maximize enemy attrition. Ushijima selected Cho's plan and would violate the principle of objective for the second time. The assault began on the evening of 3 May with the amphibious flanking operations. The attack was discovered by the Americans and resulted in almost 1,000 Japanese killed. Despite this setback, Ushijima pressed on with the main attack the following morning. U.S. naval gunfire, artillery, and close air support quickly smothered the assault. In less than 2 days, 6,227 Japanese were killed. 24th Corps had held, while the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions had gained another 700 yards. After this second humiliating defeat, Ushijima would have no more of his Chief of Staff's heroics. Colonel Yahara was henceforth given free rein to plan all future defensive maneuvers. Yahara quickly designed a scheme to achieve the original 32nd Army objective of fighting a war of attrition. His intent was to drag out the conflict for as long as possible, trading space for time when necessary. Yahara immediately canceled the still ongoing attack and withdrew the 24th Division, now at 1/3 strength, to its defensive entrenchments. The 44th Independent Mixed Brigade was withdrawn to Sugarloaf Hill to assist the 62nd Division. The 5th Artillery Group was ordered to conserve ammo, supporting only frontline engagements. Yahara had no illusion as to the type of battle that had to be waged. He applied the principle of objective by devising an unambiguous plan that maximized the economy of force. While Yahara's strategy would definitely improve the 32nd Army's posture, the Japanese force by now was too under strength for the prolonged engagement that Yahara desired. By 12 May, the 62nd Division and the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade had formed a well-integrated triangle defense around Sugarloaf Hill, with Half Moon Hill and Horseshoe Hill in the backdrop. The 6th Marine Division was fully engaged against the 62nd Division in the battle for the 32nd Army's left flank. The Japanese 24th Division still held the right flank of the now precarious Shuri Line. Sugarloaf Hill would turn out to be the single most significant engagement of the battle.
By this point in the battle, the American forces became inundated with the island's heavy rainfall. 15 inches of rain in 15 days made the supply problem as backbreaking as the fighting was ferocious, and only airdrops saved the day. Airdrops, parachuted to frontline troops on a scale never before attempted in the Pacific, delivered the only supplies received by the combat teams on many bloody days. Bucking the center of the Nip Line, the 1st Division's job was to drive through Shuri Castle. The assignment demanded every ounce of its strength. Before Shuri, in the slugging matches at Takashi Ridge and Wana Draw, there were no roads. Usually the tanks rolled along first, and then the troops followed, and along their path, a trail was born. The Amtraks came up, and the ducks, and jeeps, and trucks. The engineers followed, desperately trying for a solid roadbed, bulldozing, rearing, and ducking for cover when the mortars fell. The result of wheels following wheels could not be called roads under the best conditions. Given half a chance, the engineers could have made roads, but on May 25th, for instance, the rainfall was 5.03 inches. That's the day when Commodore Andrew G. Bissett, commander of construction troops, ordered a change in priorities. Road maintenance took precedence over airport construction, and the objective in taking the island was airports. That was the day all traffic on the island was ordered halted except for emergency hauls to frontline troops. Seabees and armored engineering groups were running behind schedule on their vast construction projects, the biggest of the war, in either theater. Schedules did not a thing if the men on the line lost this battle. Supply by air went into action on the last 2 days of May. A couple of weeks earlier, it had been tried, but with dubious results. The parachutes gave away our positions. Enemy fire prevented our troops from retrieving the stuff after it had been dropped, and a lot of it had fallen into enemy hands.
The triangle formed by Sugarloaf Hill, Half Moon Hill, and Horseshoe Ridge enabled the Japanese force holding each peak to direct fire against the approaches to either of the other peaks. What started out as a platoon-sized engagement eventually engulfed most of the 6th Marine Division and the 32nd Army's 62nd Division. With Sugarloaf Hill being only 300 meters wide and 60 meters high, 6th Marine Division commanders initially underestimated the tactical importance of the hill due to the more prominent terrain behind it.
Major General Lemuel C. Shepard's division got hurt finding out about Sugarloaf Hill on Sunday. The position really was 3 hills in a triangular defense, each mutually supporting, and all supported by the guns of the great Sherry Moss and distant guns in the south. Young Lieutenant Colonel Horatio C. Woodhouse, Jr., CO of the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Marines, later killed in action, named the middle hill Sugarloaf. It is the 22nd Marines show this day. Later this afternoon, H Company claws up its steep, slippery face. It is a hill no higher than the Statue of Liberty, from torch to toe, as wide as the length of a football field, and the run up its face is only 160 yards long. There's hardly room for a crowded company on top. The Japanese troops are now on the rear slope and all around and behind the trio in strength. 3 times H Company is driven off while 2 prongs of tanks and infantry reach round the flanks, are crippled and repulsed. Major Courtney, the battalion executive officer, is clutching the face of the hill tonight with 20 men, all that remain of H Company. 26 more come up with ammunition and join the 20. It is black and cold, and the rain is constant. There are Japs on top of Sugarloaf now, throwing down grenades. Behind the hill, a counterattack is forming. The Major's position is impossible. He must go forward or back, and the word from higher up is to take Sugarloaf today at all costs. Major Courtney, 29 and from Minnesota, makes his decision. We'll stage our own damn bonsai, he tells his men. He calls for all the mortar fire he can get. He tells his men to lean against that wall of fire so they can catch it in their helmets. The 47 go up, with the Major leading the charge, throwing grenades before him. Now they are on top, with the dripping Major all over the place, on his knees and elbows among the dead Japs, spotting and respotting his security until a direct mortar hit kills him. Lieutenant Robert O. Hutchings takes over. The little patch of America on top of the hill is hell tonight. Attacks and mortars take turnabout. The wounded go down the slope, and the dead lie in the rain.
During the 6th Marine Division's assault on Sugarloaf, the 1st Marine Division was facing a series of entrenchments on its way to Shuri Heights. The last of these was the Wani Draw, where Marines had to resort to fierce hand-to-hand combat before finally seizing their objective.
It was the 7th day of assault on Sugarloaf. 3 times the Marines had fallen back from the top, twice when the tanks moved rearward at nightfall, and the 3rd time so that artillery could pound the hill's crest. Now the 29th Regiment was slogging upwards again. Supporting tanks were having a hard time finding an opening when 1st Lieutenant Donald Pennell of Oswego, Illinois, a tank platoon leader, forced his way around one end of the ridge. He gasped at what he found. The other side was honeycombed with caves that no Marine artillery fire could reach. To the other tanks, the lieutenant yelled over the radio, "Come on around, it's a field day!" The tanks chased around that area for hours, firing 75s into cave openings and machine gunning the Japs as they came out. Flamethrowers jumped in, and soon the Shermans were cutting down running, flaming Japs. Later, as tanks passed the infantry, Marines stood up in their foxholes, grins on their faces, clasped hands overhead. Sugarloaf was secured.
In the American Eastern Sector, the 96th Division drove against Conical Hill, which was the center of gravity of the 32nd Army's flank defense. The 77th Division assaulted the center of the Japanese defenses through a series of minefields and interlocking fire positions. By 22 May, American forces had managed to push the remaining 50,000 Japanese defenders into a square-mile zone around Shuri Castle. On the evening of 22 May, Ushijima met with his staff to plan the continued withdrawal. At the same time, Geiger's 3rd Marine Amphibious Corps was preparing to seize Naha. 24th Corps had already established a lodgment at Conical Hill. The debate among the 32nd Army staff was whether to withdraw to the Chinen Peninsula on the east coast or withdraw to the south to Kiamu Peninsula. Ushijima chose Kiamu, which offered a network of natural and man-made caves. On 23 May, the 32nd Army reinforced its flanks and began the withdrawal. Under cover of cloud and fog, the Shuri line was abandoned. Many of the Japanese units dressed in all white to disguise themselves as Okinawan civilians. Although withdrawal was necessary to prolong the survival of the Japanese force, it was a tremendous blow to Japanese troop morale when it was learned symbolic Shuri Castle would not be defended to the death. On 25 May, elements of the 62nd Division were attached to the 24th Division to defend against the American force approaching Yonabaru. The remaining elements of the 62nd Division began the withdrawal. By 26 May, the Japanese withdrawal south was in full progress.
On 29 May, Able Company, Red Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, commanded by South Carolina native Captain Julius Duesenberg, approached to within 800 yards of Shuri Castle. The castle lay within the zone of the 77th Infantry Division, known as the Statue of Liberty Boys. However, General Ushijima's rear guard had stalled the 77th's advance. Impatient, Major General Del Val ordered Captain Duesenberg to take that damned place if you can. I'll make the explanations. Duesenberg radioed back, "Will do." Duesenberg's Marines stormed the stone fortress, quickly dispatching a detachment of Japanese soldiers who had remained behind. Once the castle had been taken, Duesenberg took off his helmet and removed a flag he had been carrying for just such a special occasion. He raised the flag at the highest point of the castle and let loose with a rebel yell. The flag waving overhead was not the Stars and Stripes, but the Confederate Stars and Bars. Most of the Marines joined in the yell, but a disapproving New Englander supposedly remarked, "What does he want now? Should we sing Dixie?" Major General Andrew Bruce, the commanding general of the 77th Division, protested to the 10th Army that the Marines had stolen his prize. But Lieutenant General Buckner only mildly chided Major General Del Val, saying, "How can I be sore at him? My father fought under that flag." Lieutenant General Buckner's father was the Confederate Brigadier General Buckner, who had surrendered Fort Donelson to then Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant in 1862. The Confederate battle flag flew only 2 days over Shuri Castle before the Stars and Stripes were formally raised on 31 May. Duesenberg's flag was first lowered and presented to Lieutenant General Buckner as a souvenir. Lieutenant General Buckner remarked, "Okay, now let's get on with this war."
By 4 June, the Shuri line was all but abandoned. The 6th Marine Division conducted a shore-to-shore amphibious landing at Oraku Peninsula to attack the Japanese naval bases force retreating out of Naha. The 32nd Army was now established along a mountain spine running the entire width of the island, 3 miles north of the southern tip. The 24th Division occupied the main defensive line, and the 62nd Division was guarding the coast. The 32nd Army command post was established in the caves and tunnels of Tsukazan, which had been dug the previous summer. The 32nd Army was reduced to 15% effectiveness, with only 30,000 men remaining. Infantry weapons ammo was down to 1/5 supply, and communications equipment was completely destroyed.
As the big breakthrough came and the battle moved again into a fluid state, air supply had to be resumed. It was their only hope in pressing the attack. 4 other divisions were getting frontline supplies by air also. The size of the job is illustrated by this list of plane loads of deliveries to the 1st Division in 1 week. May 31st, 44 plane loads. June 1st, 71. June 2nd, 28. June 3rd, 48. June 4th, 18. June 5th, 53. June 6th, 51. Plane loads averaged about 950 pounds each. So on June 3rd, when advances rolled out on a wide front for gains of from 800 to 2,400 yards, the battalions were picking up ammunition, water, and rations weighing nearly 50,000 pounds. In 17 days, the division received 561 plane loads of supplies. A sample day's drop to the 1st Division filled this kind of an order: 225 gallons of water, 672 D rations, 11,700 rounds of ammunition for machine guns, 500 rounds of assorted mortar shells, 150 grenades, and an order of flashlight batteries.
Ushijima began adjusting his defensive strategy. He decided the 32nd Army would fight to the last man by establishing defensive strongpoints at Yaezu and Yazoo Hills. The American force was badly battered as well. 24th Corps had all 3 divisions engaged, plus the 27th Division occupying the northern end of the island. 6th Marine Division suffered over 1,000 casualties during the Oraku Peninsula assault, with the outcome of the battle for all practical purposes decided after the Shuri Line fell. It was now only a matter of time before the last Japanese soldier would lay silent. On 13 June, the right flank of the 24th Division collapsed at Yaezu Hill. On 15 June, the 62nd Division Commander Major General Fujioka took command of what was left of the 44th Independent Mixed Brigade in a last-ditch attempt to hold Yaezu Hill. Unable to hold Yaeru, Ushijima ordered the remnants of the 24th and 62nd Divisions to rally around Yazoo Hill. The U.S. 7th Division penetrated the high ground between Yaezu and Yazoo Hills, while the 1st and 6th Marine Division charged the western flank. With the situation helpless, Ushijima issued his final order on Monday, 18 June 1945.
My beloved soldiers, you have fought courageously for nearly 3 months. You have discharged your duty. Your bravery and loyalty brighten the future. The battlefield is now in such chaos that all communications have ceased. It is impossible for me to command you. Every man in these fortifications will follow his superior officer's order and fight to the end for the sake of the motherland. This is my final order. Farewell.
General Cho added,
Do not suffer the shame of being taken prisoner. You will live for eternity.
On 22 June, both committed seppuku on a ledge overlooking the ocean and were soon buried in shallow graves.
The job in the Pacific, on Okinawa, on the next island, continues to its bitter end. A mean, dangerous, deadly job of routing out a fanatical foe. Spiritually hypnotized with an almost drunken zeal for suicidal battle, the Japs hide in their caves, have to be blasted out with grenades, with gasoline, with dynamite and flame.
The main body of the surviving Japanese force made their final stand along the 2,000-yard wide Konishi Ridge on the southern tip. The resistance by now was spotty, with some American units drawing heavy fire and others drawing almost no fire. Buckner observed the newly arrived 8th Marine Regiment assault Konishi Ridge.
As he took up position in the observation post, General Buckner was wearing his helmet with the 3 stars boldly emblazoned on the front thereof. By then it was shortly after noon, and Colonel Wallace was pointed out to General Buckner where the 2 flanks of the 8th Marines were in the valley below. Like a bolt of chain lightning striking a lightning rod, a Japanese artillery shell of unknown caliber landed on a coral rock outcropping immediately adjacent to the general on his left. It could not have been a large shell because neither Colonel Wallace nor Major Chamberlain, who were standing on either side of the general and were only a step or two to his rear, were wounded. However, the general took the full force of the explosion, the accompanying fragmentation of the shell casing, and the coral rock fragments in his chest. Some argued that it was the chunks of coral rock entering his chest that caused his grievous wound. It probably was a combination of shell fragments and coral rock.
It stopped raining today, wrote Private William Nader of the 7th Marines on Okinawa to his parents in New Jersey. It was the end of May 1945, and the protracted campaign for Okinawa seemed finally over. The Japanese had abandoned their vaunted sure defenses and were fleeing south. The incessant plum rains had ended, or so it seemed. Although Private Nader had just joined the 1st Marine Division from the 46th replacement draft 11 days earlier, he had already been tested in battle and proven rock steady. Things were looking up. "Tell Dad not to worry," he wrote. "It will be over in a short time." It was William Nader's 19th birthday, and his last. North of Kanishi, on the second day of a vicious week-long battle, Private Nader lost his life, killed by a Japanese mortar shell as he struggled to bring in a wounded Marine by stretcher from the exposed open ground dominated by the ridge. 9 infantry battalions from the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions fought for possession of Kanishi Ridge and its adjoining southern spur, Misato Ridge, throughout June 11th through 18th, 1945. The 7th Marines opened the assault on Kanishi with elements of the 1st and 2nd Battalions snaking forward in tactical formation through the open fields. The Japanese allowed enough of them forward of the line of departure before opening a deadly series of direct and indirect fire. Tanks drew immediate fire as soon as they emerged from the village of Tara. Well-aimed anti-tank fire hammered them, coming and going. Casualties mounted, momentum failed, the troops went to ground, pinned down and exposed. Smoke from the 4.2-inch mortars provided partial screening, but by mid-afternoon, the assault had clearly failed. Extraction took hours.
The strong Japanese defenses at Konishi once again forced the Marines to embrace unconventional methods, this time attempting a tactic often employed by their enemy, night fighting.
It was this sitting duck situation that caused Colonel Snedeker to seek a better way to take the ridge. After making an aerial reconnaissance of the objective, he decided to try and reach the top of the ridge under cover of darkness. The 1st Marine Division commander, Major General Pedro A. de Valle, had visited Colonel Snedeker that day and agreed that a night attack was a good way to get on with the war. The commanding officers of 1st and 2nd Battalions were briefed on the general plan later that afternoon. The overall plan was for the assaulting battalions to advance across the lowlands, using the road leading into the ridge as a dividing line between the two battalions. Normal artillery fires would target on both Kunishi and Misato ridges prior to the attack. Flares and other illuminating devices commonly used during combat were prohibited by a division order. Someone didn't get the word. 2 companies, one from each the 1st and 2nd Battalions, got across the valley during the night into position. Early in the morning, when the Japanese came out to cook breakfast, they found a little bit of a surprise awaiting them. One of the difficulties in making this attack was that arrangements had been made so that there would be no illumination while the attack was in progress. While it was called an attack, actually there were no shots fired. They made it across the valley and up the ridge without being detected. But some way or another, the illumination continued to keep illuminating, but fortunately the Japs did not observe our troops going across the valley. When daylight came, the 2 companies on the ridge were attacked by the enemy, and fierce firefights developed. It was not possible to get reinforcements onto the ridge because enemy crossfire still controlled the valley. By mid-afternoon, the situation was critical, and Lieutenant Colonel Gormley worried that the success achieved by the night advance would be wiped out. He called for tanks. The tanks moved forward at mid-afternoon of 12 June with critical supplies for the isolated companies on Kunishi. Later, the tanks brought in reinforcements and evacuated the wounded. A 1st Tank Battalion summary for that day told of Marines being loaded into concealment at Tara and disembarked via escape hatches at the foot of the ridge. By nightfall, 9 tanks had carried a reinforced platoon of 54 men of Company A forward to help out those on the ridge. These same tanks brought out 22 wounded Marines. That night, Company B reached the ridge unmolested and took a position on the left of Company C. The front held by 2nd Battalion was expanded westward when Companies G and E arrived on the ridge. By midnight, Colonel Snedeker considered his regiment's position reasonably secure. The large amount of artillery support available could destroy any enemy counterattack.
Some Japs surrender, but they are few and far between. On Okinawa, when we had killed 46,000 of the enemy, we had captured only 1,000 prisoners. On the approaches to Tokyo, there was no VE Day. The battle against a ruthless and fanatical enemy could not stop for celebration. Japan and its people fight to the death. We in America are in that same death struggle. Our fighting men will not give up. No more can we surrender here at home.
With the last line of Japanese resistance broken, the battle ended on 21 June when the 6th Marine Division reached the southern tip of Okinawa, and acting 10th Army Commander Major General Geiger declared the island secure. In the 2-month and 3-week battle for Okinawa, the American and Allied forces lost up to 84,000 casualties, with over 12,000 being killed in action. The Marine Corps alone suffered 19,460 casualties, and the materiel losses were significant, with 375 tanks destroyed, 783 aircraft lost, 36 ships sunk, and hundreds more damaged. The toll exacted on the Japanese was incredible, with over 100,000 total casualties, including 94,000 dead. However, it was the Okinawans who suffered the worst. No one will truly know the number of civilians killed during bombardments, suffocated in caves collapsed by heavy explosions, or goaded into suicide by their occupiers. But as many as 150,000 died while the survivors were left to rebuild in the hellscape. With the island secured, the last stepping stone on the way to Japan was in American hands. However, as the American public began to come to terms with the projected cost of invading the Japanese mainland, President Harry Truman ordered the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japanese surrendered on 2 September 1945, ending the war in the Pacific.
The Japanese delegation lines up on the opposite side of the surrender table from the Allies. A war which had entered its 8th terrible year in China, which had raged for 3 years and 9 months for America and Britain, which was the brutal, costly eastern half of the most horrible worldwide war in human history, is now within minutes of ending for good. General MacArthur speaks.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. The issues involving divergent ideals and ideologies have been determined on the battlefields of the world, and hence are not for our discussion or debate. The terms and conditions upon which surrender of the Japanese imperial forces is here to be given and accepted are contained in the instrument of surrender now before you. As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose, in the tradition of the countries I represent, to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.